Now, new information coming from the studies on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine have shown that it does not offer protection against the new coronavirus variant that emerged in South Africa. So what is the way forward for South Africa, and should we consider procuring more vaccines now? To answer this, as well as a whole lot more questions, I'm joined by Fatima Hassan. She's the head of Health Justice Initiative. Good to have you with us this afternoon, Ms. Hassan. Now, South Africa was very excited about the arrival of AstraZeneca, but needless to say that the Minister of Health's presentation to South Africa yesterday did throw a spanner in the works. What are the latest findings regarding AstraZeneca, and where to from here?
Thanks for having me on the show. So I think last night was obviously very disappointing for many people in our country and elsewhere in the world. It does show that our options are becoming more limited as the new data comes in and as the days pass. It appears that from the presentation last night that the minister has committed that all of the relevant scientists, including the scientists who are advising government on the Ministerial Advisory Committee, as well as the clinicians who are leading many of these clinical trials, will actually meet on an urgent basis today to take a few decisions. One of those decisions being how will government decide to use or allocate the dosages that actually arrived from the Serum Institute last week, which is the AstraZeneca vaccine, as well as what the implications are for putting the entire AstraZeneca vaccine program on hold, because you need to remember that we were also due to get about 3 million AstraZeneca vaccine doses from COVAX, and we were due to get about 115,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine from COVAX as well, in addition to some of the bilateral deals that our government last week had indicated to Parliament that it was close to finalizing, and that includes a deal with Pfizer of about 20 million doses, as well as some additional AstraZeneca supplies, and also Johnson & Johnson. So I think the important issue right now is to focus on how the Johnson & Johnson doses are actually going to come into South Africa when they come in, and how that will be administered going forward, given that last night it was indicated that that would be the immediate short-term solution for vaccinating healthcare workers. The concerning thing about Johnson & Johnson is while we may get a preliminary donation of sources are indicating that it's about 500,000 doses this week, which is to be supported, and that's an important step that the company is taking. What we have been told is that those stocks are actually coming from outside of South Africa, not from the Aspen plant necessarily, but also that the deal for 9 million dosages with Johnson & Johnson is still subject to finalizing, because Johnson & Johnson has asked for the establishment of a no-fault compensation scheme. So I think there's a lot of moving parts. It's moving quite fast. Like I said, there is a lot of disappointment, but we have to move forward with the data that we have, and it's important that the clinical safety is being interrogated. The last thing I'd like to say is that it also points to the fact that we now have limited tools available, in the sense that we have limited vaccines that we could potentially use in South Africa. This means that vaccines that are not yet being tested for the variant in South Africa needs to be tested, and other companies that have the vaccine know-how that potentially are more efficacious need to now definitely open up their technology, share that, and start testing that, particularly for the South African context. And that includes companies such as Moderna.
You mentioned that the 9 million doses that South Africa is potentially going to get from Johnson & Johnson is subject to a no-fault compensation scheme. What is that?
So, my guess is as good as yours. We're not being given a lot of details. There isn't a lot of transparency. I think these questions have to be asked of Johnson & Johnson and other pharmaceutical companies who are asking for indemnities and waivers. What we do know in a presentation to Parliament last week was that it was indicated that for Johnson & Johnson, there's a possibility of a 9 million dosage deal, but that currently there were still negotiations around the requirement from Johnson & Johnson that there be a no-fault compensation scheme. So given that Johnson & Johnson is going to be the temporary solution going forward for healthcare workers, and that we may likely get a donation of about 500,000 or more supplies this week, I think we need to clarify that that too is then not subject to a no-fault compensation scheme. So normally that would be asked where companies, don't want to face necessarily individual claims or liability for any side effects.
So let me ask you,
in the absence of sharing of...
So let me ask you this, Fatima, the efficacy rate of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine against the South Africa strain, what is that?
So that is information I think we have to ask the scientists and the clinicians who are meeting today. And I think there was some indications yesterday of why the vaccine strategy is now potentially going to be using Johnson & Johnson as a solution. But I certainly think more information needs to be shared with the public. And, just based on your earlier question, information is really important to be shared on a timely basis, even on a daily basis. There has to be more transparency, both from the drug companies as well as from government, because this otherwise fuels misinformation, and as we saw this morning, disinformation, and that in itself then contributes to vaccine hesitancy as well. Because if the public doesn't know, and if they're seeing many different numbers and different reports, and some which are not verified, it could result in more people just wanting not to take the vaccine, and that is a risk for global population immunity.
So where does that leave the current dose of 1 million AstraZeneca vaccines that are now in the country? Are they going to be sent back to India? Are they at some point going to be administered along with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? Do we know a way forward regarding that particular batch that has already been received?
Yeah, so in respect of the 1 million dosages delivered by Serum last week, what was indicated last night and been confirmed in different press statements issued by the National Department of Health is that they will be taking advice from all of our scientists and clinicians on what to do with those dosages and whether to use it, whether to administer it. There's obviously different debates that are happening globally about the need to use any vaccine that you potentially have, the need not to discard vaccines that even have a lower efficacy rate. So I think by the end of today, we probably will know what the recommendation is to government around the use of that particular batch of vaccines.
All right, well, we thank you so much for your time and the update this afternoon. That's Fatima Hassan there on South Africa's latest plans regarding the vaccination for COVID-19, AstraZeneca. A bit of a disappointment there, but the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is the one that's going to be rolled out to the health workers at a time that is still to be specified, but also more details needed as to why that particular vaccine was actually chosen and selected. The efficacy rate much higher than that of AstraZeneca. But what we did hear from Professor Mahdi is, let me read this to you. It's from the statement. He says, "You will take the existing vaccine to give you immunity against the existing variants, and then take this booster, which will boost it in order to give you protection from the new variant. A next generation of vaccinations is intended to be much broader and will cover you from the current and future variants that will take a little bit longer to develop." So really, I think from the scientific standpoint, still trying to figure out the correct combination of doses as well as vaccines, and certainly a work in progress there. Do stay with us. This is your Daytime Update on this Monday afternoon as we continue giving you the day's breaking and developing stories.